essentially you point to a line or two in Judge Engoron's judgments that have been handed down, the judgment against Donald Trump, that point to the fraud machine that is Trump. And then we'll get to some of the moves beyond that. But I thought that was a great thing to underscore.
Well, I described Judge Engoron's ruling as the sequel to The Art of the Deal. And, well, there were sort of, Trump is a blowhard reviews. Nobody at the time that The Art of the Deal came out in the 1980s said, this is the story of one criminal act after another, lying, cheating, deceiving, and bragging about it, which is exactly what I read in it. It was a road guide to being a con artist. And what Engoron does is show that every single Trump witness at the trial, except for one, and the judge takes careful note of that, lied on the stand. Donald lied, his 3 grown children lied, the quote-unquote experts, some of whom had no expertise at all but got paid over $250,000, lied. And one of the things I've always perversely admired about Donald is his ability to get people to lie for him. And indeed, he's gotten people like Alan Weiselberg to literally go to prison for him. And the only comparison I would make is years ago at the LA Times, I spent several months with a mob hitman who was dying. And every time I would call an FBI agent or detective to ask about him to verify his stories, the first thing he'd say is, I haven't talked to Harry in years. How's he doing? Because all of us respected the fact that Harry, well, he was in a terrible business. He never hurt innocent people. He was very efficient about the people he was assigned to kill or beat up, and he never got arrested because he was so good. And so the police chief in, I forget if it was Glendale or Burbank, who'd handled one of the murders, and a couple of FBI agents, they all had this perverse admiration for Harry because he was good at what he did. Well, if your measure is how good a con artist is Donald, man, you got to admire the man.
You said that as much in one of your columns. You said this is the greatest con man in modern history.
Yeah. Yep.
And you also note, I think this is in the New Republic piece. Yeah. Here it is. Judge Engoron's ruling is a detailed roadmap to Trump's thievery. We're going to have a link. Tony, I want to put a link to both of these pieces in the description, both for the video that comes from this and for the show, if you would please. Okay. But this 92-page ruling, David K. Johnston writes, establishes that Trump isn't a business genius, a modern Midas who turns everything he touches to gold. Instead, the former TV entertainer and real estate mogul is simply a crook, a white-collar thief who uses flattery, threats, lies, and an ink pen to rip off everyone he can, particularly banks and insurance companies. Engoron's opinion provides a roadmap to understanding Trump's outrageous behavior and thus what we should expect from a second Trump administration. I thought that was really sticking the landing, Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the opinion is out there on the internet. If you search for it, if you want to read it, it is very brilliantly and carefully written. And one of the key things at the end is the judge points out that it's almost pathological, this lying behavior. And the judge points out that there's no remorse or contrition. There's no acknowledgement that we might have done something wrong. And that's part of Donald's shtick. He was asked during the 2016 campaign by a radio host here in Rochester, well, Donald is a Christian. When was the last time you asked God for forgiveness? And if you're an actual Christian, you're in a constant state of seeking forgiveness. And Donald said, ask for what? Ask for forgiveness? Well, I've never done anything in my life that would require me to ask for forgiveness from anyone. What more do you need to know that the man, when he says, I'm a Christian, and gets all these Christians to back him, that it's just nonsense?
Well, Christianity and the religious right are beginning to split. Mainstream Christians and the extreme religious right beginning to split. That for another day. But it's interesting, even when I hear Christianity, it's like, well, what kind of Christian are you? Are you a, mainstream old school Christian?
Or a one?
Right. But the lack of contrition part that you point to in Engoron's statements in the judgment, because of this lack of contrition and because he feels that baked into the Trump way of doing business is this fraud that continues to happen, on the part of all officers. And this is clearly like it's in the DNA of Trump. So they built in a system, David K. Johnston, whereby there's a lifeguard on the beach now for these 3 years that he's right. Isn't that how it works?
He's much more than a lifeguard. Judge Engoron at the beginning of this hearing revoked all of Trump's business licenses. And being New York, we can't call them that. We call them business certificates. An appeals court reinstated the licenses until the trial was over. Well, the judge did something much better than giving a corporate death penalty. He removed Trump from running the company for 3 years, at least, minimum of 3 years, his sons for at least 2 years. He expanded the powers of the monitor, retired Judge Barbara Jones, from reviewing financial transactions after they occur to approving them in advance because they had made all sorts of improper movements of money under the court's order while the trial was going on. And he imposed on Trump someone he called the independent compliance monitor. Basically, this person's going to run the company. I mean, the ordinary bills will get paid, right? The bartender at the Westminster golf course is going to get his paycheck, and the vendor who delivers wine and cheese is going to get paid. But any other transactions will have to run through this independent compliance monitor who Trump has to pay for. So essentially, Donald Trump is out of business, at least for 3 years. This was the man who claims he's the greatest business genius of all time. Right.
You also point out specifics, because I got into a back and forth on, I don't know why I do this, but I've seen you do it on X or Twitter
It's
also
fun.
from time to time. Yeah, with these guys who go, well, this is an arbitrary decision on the part of a judge to rule a man's financial statement is fraud. That seemed to be so, manifestly ridiculous.
There was extraordinary amounts of testimony, and what the judge does is show that there's testimony by Alan Weiselberg that he didn't know about anything. Well, really, Forbes magazine has an audio recording of you saying exactly that. Ivanka Trump goes, I don't remember any of, I wasn't involved in the details. Really? Look at these emails that you wrote and these things you recorded. And he just eviscerates every single witness except the one guy who was very careful to tell the truth on the side of Trump.
Trump's financial statement showed an office building known as 40 Wall Street with 72 stories when it was only 63, inventing $50 million of bogus value, and showed $64 million of net operating income when it was almost $9 million in the red. I mean, this is just, he just makes it up. I mean, this isn't even being slick. This is just, you make it up. What's that? Did I lose David?
No, I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay. So now to the future, the next few moves for Donald Trump. I mean, both the legal and the financial, David. Can you speak to that?
Well, I have a piece of DC report that says Trump's next move will probably be to file personal bankruptcy. And there's a whole bunch of people who have jumped on Twitter and Threads to say that's ridiculous. He can't do that. That's what Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist, did to delay paying. That's what Rudy Giuliani did in December to delay paying. And Trump, I believe, will do this by March 12th, Monday, March 12th, 20 days from now. Donald Trump either has to put up $83 million to appeal the E. Jean Carroll second defamation ruling, or he has to get a bond, which will cost him a minimum of $17 million, and someone to guarantee the payment of the other 80% in order to appeal. If he doesn't come up with a bond or cash, he cannot appeal. The order is final. She can start enforcement proceedings to collect. If he files bankruptcy, and I quote one of my colleagues at Syracuse University College of Law, Gregory German, who teaches bankruptcy law and runs a bankruptcy clinic, as saying that there's no point in Trump putting the Trump organization into bankruptcy because it won't protect him at all. The orders are against him personally, and he's the sole owner. And all he can get is delay. Well, Donald's goal is to delay everything until November 6th, the day after the presidential election. And some people have come back and said, well, he'll have to file detailed financial statements, and if he lies in them, that's not A, going to worry Trump. B, he will find ways to file partial statements and you can amend them later. Alex Jones has held off the Sandy Hook elementary school parents and widowers of the teachers and others who were killed for more than 2 years with this kind of a technique. And so I may be wrong. You know, you've heard me say many times on this show that my batting average on my Trump predictions is 1,000. Having done more than 1,000 articles, if I'm wrong on this one, my batting average will drop to 999. I'll accept that. And if I'm wrong, come December 12th, if Donald hasn't filed personal bankruptcy, trust me, there will be a piece. It will go up once the day is over, the morning of the 13th, saying, well, I got it wrong, folks. Donald didn't file bankruptcy. But it is the most logical thing for him to do. And why haven't you heard this anywhere else? Because most journalists only write about, what's happened. I put this up in a couple of journalism forums saying news from the future.
From the near future.
Yes.
The idea, though, that he could, by declaring personal bankruptcy, delay having to write a check to E. Jean Carroll, et cetera, delay the settlements. That makes total sense. How long can he delay, David K. Jones?
Well, so far, Alex Jones has gone 2 years, but all he wants to do is delay past the election. And I'm sure many listeners and viewers are saying to themselves, wait a minute, if he files personal bankruptcy, it destroys his image as the modern Midas and the man who turns everything to gold. Nah, Donald I can tell you what his speech will be. Yes, I filed personal bankruptcy because the fascist, Marxist, liberal, radical, invade America, pro-China crowd forced me to do this. And you know what? They're going to force you to do it. They're going to take your 401k. They're going to take your house. If you don't stand with me, you're going to lose everything. They're going to steal it all. That's what he'll say, or some variation close to that.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
true
I'm
believers
wrong.
will buy that.
Right.
The true believers will buy it. It'll be incredibly interesting to see if millions of people who are they don't like Biden supporters, if they go along with this malarkey.
Well, isn't it really all then about that? Because the political ripple effects are really what this is about, David. It's funny. I am now swinging over to the, I would say, vigorously defending Biden group because of the way that he's being assailed, not by the right, but by the left. I mean, they are all over him like a bad smell to drop out of the election. And I get it. He reads older. He is older. And as a campaigner, he doesn't make the grade because of the demands of campaigning. But I'd suggest that the people he put around him, this administration, and his own ability to navigate some very tough times, make his presidency a success in the main.
Oh, I think that he is incredibly successful. The New York Times on Friday had an article, 3 surprising lessons from the resilient job market. And it had this interesting line in it. The 2024 version is the gap in unemployment between Black and white Americans is at a near record low. Job opportunities have improved for people with disabilities, criminal records, and low levels of formal education. Wages are rising for all income groups, and now that inflation has cooled, the increases in pay are outpacing price increases. And, the gasoline is essentially $1 cheaper than it was at the peak. Price of eggs has fallen very substantially. We know from government data that other people have analyzed that half of our inflation right now is just corporate greed. It's companies raising prices. And the government's very sophisticated about its analyzing this stuff. If you were selling a candy bar that weighed 1 ounce and you now sell one that weighs 0.8 of an ounce, they adjust the price for that. If your box of cereal has, 2 weeks of breakfast instead of 2 weeks and a couple of days, they adjust for that. And all of the economic indicators are very strong. That doesn't mean there aren't individuals who are doing badly. There are people who do badly in a great economy, There are people like my grandfather, who I never met and never had anything to do with, who got rich during the Great Depression because he
Right.
had cash and he used it ruthlessly against other people. So you have to look at the whole of our society. And the fact is, lots of jobs available, lots of people quitting, what are called voluntary quits. That tells you people are confident they will get another job. And, I'm 75 years old, and I literally get phone calls from people offering me jobs, and not necessarily in journalism.
Right.
And I'm like, no, thanks. That ship sailed a long time ago. My wife, who's a retired CEO and is a couple of years younger than me, same thing. She keeps getting calls from people because they can't find people to do lots of jobs, including highly paid jobs.
Well, I think the incompetence of the GOP, to get really anything done except these, half-assed bankruptcies or whatever they're, I'm sorry, half-assed impeachments.
Impeachment.
Yeah, they speak to sort of, the feckless nature of that crew. And I just wonder, though, David, you've really got an insanely damaged candidate and toxic, odious candidate in Donald Trump.
Right.
And then somehow he's able to run this race against a guy who really the big slam against him is his age,
Right. So the Democrats have never been good. I'm looking at the chat. Democrats have not for years been good at messaging. It's extraordinary. The party that used to be, without question, the party of working people has lost a lot of organizing skills, and the criticism that it is dominated by educated people is not unreasonable. On the other hand, Joe Biden is clearly supremely confident of what he's doing, and my suspicion, and we'll know this after all this is over, is that Biden doesn't want to get out and get in the fight too early. He doesn't want to peak. He doesn't want news organizations to go, it's old news. Joe said that 6 months ago. So he's biding his time, and he's also letting Donald be Donald. I mean, Donald Trump basically said to Vladimir Putin the other day, go attack all the countries you want to in Eastern Europe. And that's exactly what Putin has been on the record for 25 years as saying he wants to do. He wants to put Hungary and the 3 Baltic republics and Poland back under the boot of the Kremlin. And I don't think that's going to sit well with most Americans. I could be wrong, but I don't think most Americans are going to value Vladimir Putin's murderous dictatorship and the loss of freedom for all those people who lived and grew up under the Soviet Empire, going back under his boot.
Well, the way they argue it, David, of course, is not that way. They suggest, well, a lot of what, for example, is in that argument is fine, but it doesn't really address our interests here at home. We're spending too much money on foreign. Now, I'd suggest, based on what you've just said, that it very much addresses our interests. We want a free Ukraine.
I would fault the Democrats, other than some of the members of Congress who are mostly talking on MSNBC. They're not showing up elsewhere, for not getting across 2 facts. One of them is our interests are absolutely at hand, because if Europe is dominated by Vladimir Putin, it's very bad for our economy, for the future of our liberties and freedom, and puts us at risk of a shooting war with a nuclear power. And secondly, about 93% of the aid to Ukraine is a jobs program in America. It's making bullets and mortar shells and tanks here in America that we then give to the Ukrainians, who've been using that equipment very, very well. And the amount of money we've spent, which is infinitesimal over the last 2 years compared to the size of our federal budget, the best estimates I've read from the Institute of the Study of War and some other folks are, we have essentially degraded of the working war machinery of Russia, tanks, armored personnel carriers, helicopters. We've taken out half of it. My goodness.
That's right.
Putin less of a threat to us. And why would we stop? Let's keep going. Let's make Putin, put out all his effort. I'm sorry that 300,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or are casualties, meaning that they've been taken out of combat because they were injured. But we got to stop this guy. And he is so murderous that the Russian helicopter pilot who took his helicopter and flew it over to the Ukrainians,
right,
and then left the war scene and went to live in Spain, They assassinated him a couple of days
They
ago.
killed him. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And he will do that. He has no regard for anything but his power as the modern czar, and he will kill anyone, including Viktor Navalny, who gets in his way. And like Donald Trump, there's no sense of remorse. Of course, this is what I do. This is who I am. I'm special.
Well, the reality is also anybody who, even in Navalny's memorials, they rallied hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people were rounded up and arrested. So there is just not a sense of freedom of protest, and you've got a literal squashing of any pushback on Vladimir Putin. In my last,
Mark, let me be clear about something, if I can. I would love to have our defense budget be a half or a third of what it is. I very much wish that was the case, but I recognize we live in a very dangerous world with people who, just because we're the world leader, don't like us, and because we've made lots of terrible policy judgments, don't like us. And the reality is, if we don't address Putin, we will embolden other dictators both to harm their own people, and in some cases, as we see with China and President Xi, take over other real estate the way that Putin has done in Ukraine.
Well, the NATO statements that Trump made, just as far as that goes, you'd think that, that is something that should haunt Trump and that campaign. We'll see if it does. I'm seeing in the chat, David, and I'll let you go here in a minute, but just on the politics of it all, I see in the chat, but those who, like Dave, is it Axelrod, who is, he's pretty solid as as an opinion. He's very concerned. The anxiety that runs through the Democrats as to Joe Biden's abilities, both on the stump as a campaigner and just moving forward, they seem to be overtaking any kind of sense of the accomplishments. Is this something, I guess what I'm asking you is this a phenomenon that is generated, sort of self-generated? Or is this a reality? Are they responding to an objective reality?
There's a clear split among professionals in the Democratic Party about what to do here. And I would point out that changing your horse in the middle of a race is an extraordinarily risky proposition. And who is it you're going to put forward who has the record and the name recognition and can do a better job? Nobody, not David Axelrod or anybody else who I've seen, is disputing that on the ability to get laws passed, to spend money in thoughtful ways, that Biden is at the top of the game for anybody on that. I mean, but Biden has spent a lot of money in economically troubled areas that voted 4-1 for Donald Trump. He's fulfilling his promise that I'm the president of all the people. And I think that, he's not an inspiring person. Nobody gets up in the morning like people did with John F. Kennedy was running and going, oh, I want to do this. That's not the choice. The choice is, do you want a competent hand on the tiller or do you want a crazy man? And I think that choice is very clear and very easy to make. A bigger question I might ask the Democrats is, do you want to run Kamala Harris again for vice president? Because in a number of cases where she was called upon and was given opportunities to really say something, I think she flubbed it. Her lack of knowledge of foreign affairs and world history. She's a very good campaigner. She won every campaign she's ever run for, unexpectedly in some cases. But she doesn't have the same issue of charisma. So who is coming along? And the Democrats need to say, well, we're going to get Joe Biden reelected, and we are going to work on our bench, because in 2024, we're going to present you somebody in their 40s or 50s, or maybe their 60s, but hopefully their 40s or 50s. And see the years from 2024 to 2029 as 2025 to 2029 as rebuilding years, as they say in football or baseball.
Yeah, I had a big argument just this morning with a guy who's a former White House correspondent, a very well-respected news guy. And he was talking about Kamala, and I think she's really flawed. And I think we have short memories on this. I mean, she doesn't campaign well, and as you say, I don't think she handles situations that shouldn't be that hard that well. But you've got then the Klobuchars and the Sherrod Browns of the world, and you do need to raise their profile because people just don't really know them. And I think you make a really good point about name recognition and the rest. All right, I've kept you too long. You're great. We're linking to your pieces, both of them in the New Republic, also in dcreport.org. David, great.
And put down to ask me on March 13th whether I was wrong or
Oh,
not if my batting
yes.
average falls.
That's right.